You're home rather early? Mike's answered and narrowed his eye as the blue monster lived and he entered his apartment around 8:30. He hadn't been expecting Sully to be home until later in the evening, or tomorrow maybe. After his big date with Sophie Boggs, something wasn't right there. Sully didn't know what to say at first. He just stared and foot at the wall and tried to come up with a good way to tell his best friend that he had plans change in the last second, and that he just spent the last few hours with Sophie's brother instead. Well, you see, he had a hard time finding the right words. Something came up, Mike, and I never made it to Sophie's. Mike's reaction was just exactly what the blue monster had been expecting and dreading all evening. The green monster got up from his chair, raised his voice, and gained a facial expression of someone who had just learned that word coming to an end. What? You promised me you'd give it a chance! Well, technically I didn't. It wasn't on What on earth did you make cancel? Mike then walked over to the hairy monster in 3 big steps. He was getting angry now. His best friend couldn't possibly know his own good. I got a phone call, Mike, from Gladys, Randall's neighbor. Seriously, Sully? Mike wasn't even shouting anymore, but his tone of voice had really captured that made Sully even feel more uncomfortable. You are not going to tell me that you canceled your date because of Randall, are you? Yeah, I kinda did. Sully grimaced, and his big blue eyes just rested on Mike as he continued. Well, that dinner with Sophie wasn't the date in the first place. I would have told you, Dad. I'm not crushing on her, and Randall isn't feeling good. His neighbor wanted me there. And Sully stopped himself and chose not to tell Mike about Randall that had been crying. It felt a little too personal. The green monster let out a sigh as he allowed the information to sink in. Sometimes he had troubles of understanding his best friend's choices, and this was actually one of those moments. Who would skip a date with a girl who just likes them in order to spend the evening trying to recover from former enemy? This was going out of hand, and Mike thought it'd be the time to say so. Oh, just skip a date with the girl who likes him and to spend the evening trying to recover for a former enemy? That wasn't getting out of hand. Mike just thought he just needed some time to say so. Listen, Sul, I've told you before and I'll always be here for you, and I am interested in the things you care about. Sully tried to interrupt, but Mike raised his hand in order to keep his best friend silent. He wasn't finished yet. But I must admit, I have a hard time following you on this one. Don't you see that? You're taking his looking after Randall thing a little too far. Tonight you actually picked on him over a girl. I know you want to help him, but you're giving the guy too much space, and he's interrupting your private life, and he'll just get in the way of your plans. Mike just looked at Sully directly in the eyes. He meant every single word he said. Sully was spending way too much time with the lizard, and this was far from normal. The little monster's face did the same exact expression as he continued his pep talk. Aren't you planning to visit him tomorrow? Yeah, I've already told him that I'm coming over. Then I'm going with you. Sully raised his eyebrows in confusion. The fight was preparing for himself that he didn't seem to come after all. Mike was going with him? What? But you said you would... I'm worried about that big guy, Mike continued. I want to see exactly what happens over there to make sure this guy is not threatening you or anything. Mike, there's no need to... He's not threatening. He's depressed and... Well, sounds like he needs a proper cheer up then. And I just happen to be the successful monster on the laugh floor, so I'm probably the right one to tell him a joke or two. Sully felt uncomfortable. Well, this didn't sound like a very good idea. Mike and Randall didn't go that well together, and as far as they know, they hardly talked to each other since the short period of they were friends in college. Besides, Sully didn't think Randall was very keen on him bringing Mike over to meet him. But good-hearted as he was, the blue monster didn't want to hurt his best friend's feelings after all. Mike always stood up for him, and Sully thought the best thing he could do for him was to return and accept his support. Okay, Mike, he said eventually, sending a smile to his friend's direction. You can come with me tomorrow. I'm not sure if Randall will like it. He tossed me out the first time I was there, but I guess it was worth a shot. Great, Mike replied with a grin with a thumbs up. Sully felt no more nervous than what he had done in a while. Saturday was cold and cloudy, and the blanket of snow was still covering up the parts of Monstropolis that there wasn't really many hidden underneath the building. The city was quiet. Almost everyone had chose to stay indoors. Even the pigeons in the park had found themselves a warm, dry place to rest. Silence had ruled over one of the apartments in the city, too. The three monsters sat around the table, and not much was between them, although they really knew each other, and they have done so for many years. The purple one stared at a little green thing sitting on the opposite side of him. He couldn't believe that Sullivan had brought along Wazowski. They had barely exchanged a word since college, and it hadn't been exactly a pleasant surprise to see him. So at first the lizard had yelled at him and told him to get the hell out, but then Sullivan's face expression had turned to too much even for Randall to handle. His new friend had looked as if the entire world had come down if Randall didn't just give up and flat make the chance. And Randall just ended up inviting Mike in, although it desired him to stab himself. Damn it, he was getting soft. Gladys Lorenzo had left the boys for himself for a while. She insisted on making them lunch over at the apartment across the hall. It wasn't every day that she was lucky enough to meet the two friends of her sweet Randy. However, her lunch invitation made the situation even more awkward for the little group out there. They couldn't really do anything, just sit around and wait for it to be finished. Sully just looked at Randall. Randall looked at Mike. Mike glanced at the door, then at Randall, and then up at Sully and narrowed his eye. The blue monster eventually noticed that the green one was looking at him and tried to smile in return, although it came out as a short grimace. A bird flew away from outside the window. So, Mike fought for the moment to say something, and then the break of silence caused both Sully and Randall to jump slightly out of their chairs. "What's up then, Randall?" Mike smiled at the purple monster's direction. "I'm being babysat, this dope." Randall gestured towards Sullivan, who let out an artificial laugh. "Yeah, but I'm only doing it for your own good. I'm your friend, and I don't want you to." "I know." Randall lowered his gaze, and of course Sully could swear a little smile was present on his face. He let out a breath in the sight of it. Mike coughed. For a new long pause followed by Sully's eyes were still all glued to the lizard, and once again, Mike thought it was up to him to start a conversation. "Not going along good at the moment, Randall. Anyway, it's good to see you back. The green monster looked at the host, and of course tried his best to come up with a good compliment. "Good. Hey, have I mentioned my current project? I happen to be a very busy guy in these days. With being a clown?" "No, well, yeah, that too. But I'm working on this great musical on the side, and it's accompanying the play." Mike didn't notice Sully's desperate gestures to make him stop, or continued in an eager tone. "It's called Put That Big Thing Back Where It Came From, or So Help Me, and it's about ouch." Mike rubbed his leg underneath the table where Sully had just pinched him. The blue monster finished his sentence himself. "It's about friendship." Mike finally understood the blue one's point. Perhaps a musical describing Randall's latest actions in Monsters, Inc. wasn't really the best subject to the conversation to cheer him up. The green monster, of course, coughed a couple times before playing along with Sully. "Hey, friendship, that's what it is. And you know what, Randall? I can get you in front row tickets." Randall mumbled something similar to "good grief," but with all that free fell silent again, and it fell present upon surprise when Miss Lorenzo popped her head through the door, and around few minutes later had told him that lunch was ready. Randall's neighbor had clearly had a talent for cooking. For lunch, she had made the three special boys scrambled eggs, pancakes, bread, and baked beans and hot dogs. On the table, there was some homemade jam, cheese, a variety of vegetables, fresh fruit, and a tray of cookies which appeared straight out of the oven. They filled the entire apartment with one sweet scent that caused every tummy to rumble. Sully and Mike needed a couple of minutes to take it in. If this was miles and inches away from them they normally would prepare at home, which consists of a simple sandwich or some yogurt. Randall, on the other hand, was clearly more used to it. He sat down on what Sully guessed at the usual seat, and started pouring himself some tea. The blue monster noticed that his lips were moving, but didn't catch a word what he said. I'm sorry, I didn't get that. I said, would you like some tea?" Randall held up the pot over to the teacup and placed down his own, and eventually Sully understood what he was expected to answer and nodded his head. "Yeah, thank you." He sat down next to the lizard. As he did, his arm brushed against one of Randall's touch, causing him to withdraw right away. Although he didn't really fully understand why, but Sully could feel himself blushing in between the thick layers of fur, and the fact that Mike was looking at him with an expression Sully hadn't seen him, he wasn't helping much. Mike was given a chair next to Miss Lorenzo, and pinched his cheek and told him that he reminded her of her late husband. Mike replied with the most charming smile, and it was hard for Sully to see that it wasn't exactly love in the situation. When the meal was divine, Gladys was really helpful and excellent cook. And once again, when Sully could see that Randall allowed her to cook for him, even back in the days before he got friendly, even Mike had to admit spending the day with Sully's new friends hadn't been such a bad idea after all, and he munched on his 5th or 6th cookie. When they were done eating, all 3 males acted as if they should do the dishes, before leaving the old lady to herself for a while. It was nap time. Unfortunately, the good mood had been present around the table, as it seemed to decrease the minute. Sully, Randall, and Mike made it back across the hall and entered the lizard's apartment again. They didn't have the meal to talk about anymore, although Sully tried to keep the conversation running. There was even much help from the other 2. Randall acted as if it was a free-for-all at times, and spoke to Mike only if he had to. Lucky for him, Mike didn't seem to be that interested in talking to him either. The little green monster just said a word then and now, but mostly stayed close to Sully and kept his mouth shut. Something was extremely rare for him. About around a half an hour from Randall's couch, with hardly of a conversation, Sully suggested they all go outside for a little while. The blue monster thought that things would probably loosen up between them if they had done something interesting to do. The 2 others weren't that hard to ask, as they both wanted to escape each other's company in the apartment. So before Sully knew what was happening, they were all out on the street and walking towards the center of Monstropolis. Randall still looked very angry, and the fury of the monster was still worried about it, and he didn't even want exactly the scaly one to win his new trust to him, and just wanted to keep the conversation running. While they were walking, it wasn't easy. The only answers that escaped the purple one's lips were short statements such as yeah, no, or I don't care. Sully tried to look to Mike for help, and then the green one just smirked back at him, leaving the blue monster rather confused. Mike was acting weird. As they walked deeper into the city, Sully decided that it was time to come up with something to do. Something perhaps that didn't require a lot of thinking. He stopped walking, turned towards Randall, and tried to put a smile. What would you like to do, Randall? I'm here too, Mike shot in behind Sully's back. He didn't like the neglected look like this. I know that, Mike, Sully sighed. Now, what would you like to do, Randall and Mike? I don't care. Randall crossed all 4 of his arms and tried his best to keep his eyes away from Mike. The little eyeball was just annoying him as he remembered, and he didn't see how Sullivan could possibly stand being friends with him. Perhaps we could see a movie? Sully remembered that there was only a couple blocks away from the movie theater, which that would be perfect. There was no need to talk there. But it's early in the afternoon. They never show anything good at this time, Mike complained. Why don't we play paintball or... A movie sounds good. Randall shot before Mike could finish his sentence. He started walking in the right direction, causing the 2 to quickly follow him. You know, Sul, if he gets in charge all the time, his free friends things ain't gonna work. Mike then gave Sully an evil eye, but the only thing that kept him from the angry stare back in reply. When they got to the movie theater, it became clear that Mike had been right. There weren't really any good movies showing at this time of day. The free friends ended up buying tickets to a romantic comedy with bad reviews, and when the movie started, when there was only 3 monsters present, apart from 2 teenagers in the back row, clearly ditching the school, who were busy making out and didn't even notice that there was something going on with the canvas in front of them. Sully sat in the middle seat, with Mike to his left and Randall to his right. Mike had to insist on getting snacks for the film, and he ended up buying somewhat a wrapped bag that seemed to be around, made loud noises each time he stuck his hand to it. He ate it all during the first 20 minutes of the film, and he used the rest to blame for himself for not buying 2. The rest of the movie was just terrible. Sully laughed a couple times, but only because it was happening on the big screen that was so bad. It surprised him at the right side. Randall actually chuckled a bit at some parts, and that was the point where the purple monster even noticed that they were both laughing. He turned his head towards to give Sully a grin, wordlessly spelling out the "what the hell." It caused the blue monster to look at the canvas again, and wondering what even made him blush. When the movie finished, they all headed back to Randall's apartment, and now they had finally had something to talk about. They discussed about the movie as they were walking. It had turned out that Mike was the only one who actually enjoyed it, and he actually talked about bringing Celia along to see it during the day, maybe next week. Randall looked at Sully, and the blue one had to look away that he wouldn't start laughing. Once they made it back, Miss Lorenzo was waiting for them, freshly restored from her nap. After making sure it was okay for Randall to be left with her during the evening, Sully and Mike decided it was probably best for them to head home. Sully had told Randall that he would check on him again tomorrow, and then they would all say goodbye. Gladys gave Mike a hug and another pinch on his cheek, and for a moment, Sully was actually wondering on whether he should give Randall a hug or not. He found himself staring at the lean purple figure with the feelings that had a hard time explaining. Eventually ended up patting Randall on his shoulder before he quickly exited out of the building door with Mike. Not much had said between the two of the best friends on the way home. Sully was never struggled much with talking to Mike. He wondered if his best friend was angry with him. The blue monster tried to start different conversations by making small statements on the weather and things around him, but only replies when he got the green one yeses and the occasional smiles. It wasn't until they entered the room at their own front door, Mike finally turned to look at Sully, and his face was serious. There was a hint of a smile present there. Sully recognized that look, and it was Mike. "I have something very important to tell you, look." And the blue monster looked back at him, not knowing whether they were ready or not. "Sully," Mike stated, placing his hand on Sully's arms, "I just want to say I believe you now." "On what? You don't have a crush." Sully couldn't help but interrupt. Mike was still going on about the whole Sophie thing. The furry monster's voice was almost a yell and replied, "Come on, that's not what I've been telling you all along. I don't have a crush." "On Sophie," Mike raised his hand to shut Sully up and gave him this know-it-all smile. "You don't have a crush on Sophie." Mike then turned around, saying that he was going to take a shower, and left on questioning Sully in the hall. The blue monster listened to Mike's whistlade, and although he still didn't fully understand, the part of him was know too well what the green one had to meant his last statement.